John Henry, lowgenius.net. You know the drill. Today we're going to discuss some things that I'd honestly hope to make a part of my broader cultural suicide series, and we'll probably get to that at a later date, but I'll have to work on that another way. Today's subject is the myth of anarchy. Let me just make a few adjustments here to the camera. So I've been involved in a couple of pretty intense discussions over the last couple of days on the Facebook wall of an acquaintance who appears to be a self-styled anarchist. This self-styled anarchist, as I was in the process of writing this article, decided to delete me and block me because he couldn't support his own arguments. The concept of anarchy has a long and vivid history, and there's some things that I want to dispose of at the beginning so I can get the root of this piece. First, I'm not here to discuss anarchy on a macro level. Yes, it's valid to observe that entropy increases, and it's also valid to observe that human attempts to decrease entropy tend only to increase it in other directions. This has been demonstrated time and time again in such fields as wildlife management. Human meddling in nature tends to have unforeseen consequences that are more destructive than the problems they purport to solve, and I accept that as valid. Second, I'm not here to argue against utopian aspiration. There is a type of limited anarchy, which we'll get to later on, that I believe constitutes the best case scenario for human cultural advancement. But I believe that even under the most optimal conditions, it will be several generations before we're evolved enough to achieve that. What I'm here to address is the empty chest-thumping and blow up all the corporations and governments, quote, anarchy, that actually isn't anarchy at all. If true anarchy were suddenly imposed right this minute, despotism would follow before the minute expired. As my friend Sean so succinctly put it, people see anarchy as I get what I feel I deserve, and don't get that it means I get raped harder because no one will stop all the rape. The vast majority of people who scream for anarchy don't really understand what the word means. It means that there's no more internet or television or radio or iPods or favorite bands or worldwide sharing of information, because in a true anarchy, none of those things can exist. The systems that allow them to do so wouldn't be there. By the same token, such advocates often fail to acknowledge certain fundamental realities of human nature that cannot, and in some cases should not, be changed. For instance, if all law and government structure disappeared right now, the first thing that would happen is that the most avaricious, greedy, and violent individuals would start to seize power. If the other guy is willing to kill you or destroy your mind or make you his slave, and you're not willing to go one step farther than he is, you lose. Anarchy is not a bunch of hippies sitting around smoking pot and celebrating oneness with nature. It's the removal of all social constructs that keep us from killing each other. Another thing that's really irritated me is this influx of snotty, entitled college kids who think that admiring each other's unwashed Che Guevara t-shirts over a few bong hits makes them anarchists. Oh, they say, I can survive on my own, you're not the boss of me! Yet they fail to consider, with no government and no social contract, who's there to stop any roving psychopath from killing them or enslaving them and taking all the things that they've worked so hard to acquire for their survival. For that matter, where will they turn when they have a serious medical issue? You can't go to a hospital in an anarchy that wouldn't exist. Sure can't call the police to protect you since there wouldn't be any. So what's left? We all live as individuals and never come in contact with other human beings? That doesn't seem like a viable long-term strategy for survival of the species. Now granted, there are those who would suggest that it's precisely the solution that's needed, but for the purpose of this article, I'm assuming that we want to perpetuate the species and just try to avoid killing the planet in the process. The reality is that human beings will always organize themselves into hierarchies and communities because it's necessary to survive. There's nothing wrong with hierarchy in and of itself, nor with the notion that not everybody needs to be a leader. People who make grandiose pronouncements about such things are only kidding themselves. It's a function of the natural differences between people, that some will be better at some things and others will be better at other things. Some will be better at leading and organizing a community, others will be better at producing the goods and services that keep that community viable. Contrary to pop anarchist bullshit, that's not a bad arrangement. It is in fact quite reasonable and sensible. The problem the pop anarchists have is they consistently want to throw the baby out with the soiled diaper. This is no more sensible than the Tea Partiers who loudly proclaim the evils of socialism. Making a profit isn't an inherently bad thing. It's when the greed for profit at the expense of the greater community corrupts the process and leads to despotism that it becomes a bad thing. By the same token, asking each member of the community to contribute to the welfare of the other members of the community is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's when the greed for material comfort without contributing to the community turns social welfare into simply giving people money for doing nothing that it becomes a problem. And there are secondary problems which lead for this. For instance, here in the U.S., what I do on this website isn't considered worthy of drawing a salary. In some countries, there are systems in place to ensure that people like me are able to do what we do best without having to worry about wasting time making widgets in some factory so we can eat. There are even countries in which concepts like integrity and honor are effective preventative measures against abuse of social welfare systems, but now is not the time to go deeply into that. The point ultimately is this. Anarchy, as the term is used by self-important stoners who think that no government just means we all get to smoke pot, is not only a fantasy, it's a sure recipe for despotism. A rational anarchy, in which social constructs and hierarchies are arranged both for the benefit and with the consent of those participating, is an entirely different concept than what is proposed by these angry young men with their trendy little slogans and barely understood phrases like left-right paradigm. Clue, it's called communication. We need to have mutually agreed definitions for things so that we can understand each other. And social constructs. Without such constructs, we're animals and not particularly intelligent ones. I have friends who are anarchists that understand these things. Hanna, Pope Snarky, Sean, plenty of others with whom I've had long and involved discussions on the subject. But I see a lot more people who just mindlessly scream pop culture bullshit. Many of them are hypocritical jackasses. The people who immediately start name-calling and threatening when you suggest that maybe they've got more thinking to do. The people who will, if you insist on continuing to challenge their ideas, start threatening you, revealing that, given the opportunity, they will be the oppressor they claim to stand against. This fellow, who I'm not naming, who just blocked me on Facebook, is a great example of that. The guy can't think worth a shit. He couldn't even spell cognitive dissonance right. He wants to argue back and forth with me from a position of being some stupid little kid who sits around smoking bong hits and listening to Rage Against the Machine albums when that was me 20 years ago, and I've been having these discussions ever since. When I challenge his logic with logic of my own, he gets pissed off and blocks me, shuts me out, and leaves me so that I can't say anything anymore in my own defense or to encourage him to maybe think a little harder. And the thing about it is I was being polite because the mouthy little asshole needs to be slapped. I mean, really, just an arrogant little prick. And the worst part is he's part of a major liberal political activism group out on the West Coast. It's just ridiculous. Anyway. A rational anarchy, one in which each person is able to pursue their own interests and goals to their own benefit and that of society, and in which each person agrees to barter or exchange the products of their strengths for the products of other people's strengths, is entirely possible, but probably not for several generations. Right now we're still too stuck on me, with little empathy or concern for other people or the wider whole of humanity, and that's going to take a lot of time to fix, especially when we can't even get past the point of facing our own fallibility in a simple conversation without throwing a fit and trying to shut people up. In spite of the earnest passion of pop anarchists, complete system collapse won't fix anything at all. It'll just make the problems we already have much worse very quickly. Anarchy, by that popular definition, is not only a myth, it's a death sentence